The morning sun cast long shadows across the rocky terrain as Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez adjusted his scope for the 100th time. His hands, steady despite 3 days without proper sleep, moved with the precision of someone who had done this countless times before. But nothing in his 12 years as a military sniper had prepared him for what his commanding officer was asking. "Sir, with respect, that's nearly a mile and a half," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper, as he peered through his binoculars at the distant compound. The target was so far away it looked like a tiny speck against the mountainside. The longest confirmed kill in military history is 3,540 meters by a Canadian sniper. What you're asking for is 1,420 meters in these wind conditions. Colonel James Mitchell lowered his own binoculars and turned to face the young sergeant. His weathered face showed the strain of the past week's operations. "I know what I'm asking, Rodriguez, but that man down there has been coordinating attacks on our convoys for months. Intelligence says he's planning something big for tomorrow. We've tried everything else." Marcus looked back through his scope. The enemy leader, known only as the Ghost to intelligence agencies, was indeed visible on the compound's highest balcony. He appeared to be in a meeting with several other figures, all of them gathered around what looked like tactical maps spread across a table. The distance was staggering. At 420 meters, he would need to account for wind speed, air pressure, temperature, humidity, and the Earth's rotation. Even the slightest miscalculation would send the bullet harmlessly into the rocks. "The wind is gusting between 8 and 12 miles per hour from the northwest," Marcus murmured, more to himself than to the colonel. "Temperature is 94 degrees Fahrenheit, humidity at about 30%. He paused, running calculations in his head that most people would need a computer for. "Sir, even with perfect conditions, the margin for error is enormous." The radio crackled to life. "Alpha Base to Overwatch. We have confirmation that Convoy Delta is moving through Sector 7 in 4 hours. If the Ghost is planning an ambush tomorrow, they'll be sitting ducks." Colonel Mitchell's jaw tightened. Convoy Delta was carrying medical supplies to a civilian hospital in the valley below. 30 soldiers and 2 medics would be making that run. And if the Ghost's reputation was accurate, none of them would make it through alive. This wasn't just about military strategy anymore. It was about saving lives. "Rodriguez, I've seen your record," the colonel said quietly. 43 confirmed kills. You've never missed a shot when it mattered. I'm not ordering you to take this shot. I'm asking. Marcus felt the weight of his rifle against his shoulder. The Barrett M82A1 was a beautiful weapon, capable of incredible accuracy in the right hands. But even the best rifle in the world couldn't overcome the laws of physics. At this distance, the bullet would take nearly 2 seconds to reach its target. In 2 seconds, a person could take several steps in any direction. Through his scope, he watched the Ghost gesture animatedly at the maps. The man was tall, probably around 6 feet, with a distinctive white beard that had earned him his nickname among the local population. Intelligence reports suggested he was in his early 50s, a former military officer who had turned to coordinating insurgent activities after his village was destroyed in an earlier conflict. "What kind of backup do we have?" Marcus asked, already knowing he was going to attempt the impossible. "Air support is 20 minutes out," Colonel Mitchell replied, "but by then he'll be underground. This meeting is our only window. Intelligence says he rarely appears in the open like this." Marcus nodded slowly. He understood the situation perfectly. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to eliminate a high-value target who had been responsible for numerous attacks on coalition forces. But it was also potentially a once-in-a-lifetime mistake that could haunt him forever if he missed and revealed their position. The wind shifted slightly, and Marcus felt it on his face. He closed his eyes for a moment, centering himself the way his instructor had taught him years ago at sniper school. "Breathing is everything," Sergeant Major Thompson used to say. "Your heartbeat, your breathing, your mental state. Everything has to be in perfect harmony." When he opened his eyes, Marcus began the meticulous process of setting up for the shot. He adjusted his bipod legs to ensure perfect stability on the rocky outcrop. He checked his scope settings one more time, making minute adjustments based on the current conditions. The crosshairs in his scope seemed to dance slightly in the heat shimmer rising from the valley floor. "Sir?" Marcus said finally, his eye pressed against the scope. "I need you to spot for me. Watch for the bullet impact if I miss. And sir?" He paused, his finger resting lightly on the trigger guard. "If this goes wrong, we're going to have a lot of very angry people shooting back at us very quickly." Colonel Mitchell settled in beside him with his own spotting scope. "Understood, Sergeant. Take your time. Make it count." Marcus had been lying in the same position for 47 minutes, watching the ghost through his scope. The enemy leader had moved twice, each time making Marcus recalculate everything. Now the man stood perfectly still, leaning over the tactical maps with his back toward the sniper's position. It was the best shot Marcus was likely to get. The Barrett M82A1 felt like an extension of his body after all these years. Every scratch on the stock, every slight imperfection in the metal, was as familiar to him as his own heartbeat. But this shot would push both man and machine to their absolute limits. At 1,420 meters, the .50 caliber bullet would drop approximately 32 feet from its initial trajectory. The wind would push it several more feet to the side. Winds holding steady at 10 miles per hour from the northwest. Colonel Mitchell whispered, his eye glued to his spotting scope. "Target is stationary. Range confirmed at 1,420 meters. Marcus made one final adjustment to his scope. The mathematics involved in long-distance shooting were complex, but years of training had made them second nature. Bullet drop, windage, air density, even the Coriolis effect from the Earth's rotation. All of these factors had to be calculated and compensated for in a matter of seconds. Through the scope, the ghost appeared surprisingly ordinary. He wore simple desert camouflage and moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to command. Intelligence reports indicated he had been a captain in the National Army before the current conflict began. Now he was responsible for organizing attacks that had killed dozens of coalition soldiers and countless civilians. "Sir, I have a concern," Marcus whispered. "At this distance, even if I hit the target, the sound of the shot will take over 4 seconds to reach the compound. A security team won't immediately know where it came from, but they'll figure it out quickly." "How quickly?" Colonel Mitchell asked. "Maybe 2 minutes to pinpoint our location. 3 minutes to organize a response. We'll need to be gone in 90 seconds after I pull this trigger." The colonel nodded grimly. Their extraction point was a steep climb down the backside of the ridge, where a helicopter would be waiting. 90 seconds wasn't much time, especially carrying heavy equipment over rocky terrain. Marcus controlled his breathing, slowing his heart rate the way he had been trained. In sniper school, they had taught him that the best shots were fired during the natural pause between heartbeats, when the body was completely still. At this distance, even the slight movement from his pulse could send the bullet off target. The ghost straightened up from the maps and turned slightly. For a moment, Marcus could see the man's face clearly through the scope. He looked tired, older than his intelligence photos suggested. There were deep lines around his eyes, the kind that came from stress and sleepless nights. For just an instant, Marcus wondered about the man's story. Did he have a family? Children? Then he remembered Convoy Delta and the medical supplies that needed to reach the hospital. He remembered the intelligence reports about the planned ambush. Professional snipers learned early in their training not to think of targets as people. They were obstacles to be removed, problems to be solved. "Target is moving again," Colonel Mitchell reported quietly. "He's walking toward the eastern side of the balcony." Marcus tracked the movement smoothly, his scope following the ghost's path across the compound's upper level. The man paused near what appeared to be a communications setup, several radios and what looked like a satellite phone. If he was coordinating the ambush from here, this equipment would be crucial to his plans. "He stopped again," the colonel whispered. "Range is now 1,425 meters. Still have a clear shot." The extra 5 meters meant recalculating everything, but Marcus made the adjustments quickly. His finger moved from the trigger guard to rest lightly on the trigger itself. The safety had been off for the past 10 minutes. A bead of sweat rolled down Marcus's forehead, stinging his left eye. He blinked it away carefully, never moving his head from its position against the stock. The sun was getting higher now, creating more heat shimmer in the air between his position and the target. Heat shimmer could distort his view and affect the bullet's path. "Sir, we need to take this shot soon," Marcus said quietly. "Conditions are going to get worse as the day heats up." Through his scope, Marcus watched the ghost pick up what appeared to be a radio handset. The man was clearly communicating with someone, probably coordinating final details for tomorrow's ambush. Every second they delayed meant Convoy Delta was in greater danger. Marcus began the final countdown sequence he had used on every long-distance shot of his career. Deep breath in, let half of it out, hold. Find the natural pause between heartbeats. Align the crosshairs perfectly on the target's center mass. Apply steady pressure to the trigger, straight back, no jerking motion. On my count, Marcus whispered. 3, 2. The ghost moved suddenly, stepping back from the communications equipment toward the center of the balcony. Marcus held his fire, tracking the movement, waiting for the man to become stationary again. This was the most difficult part of precision shooting, having the patience to wait for the perfect moment, even when every instinct screamed to take the shot while it was available. He stopped. Colonel Mitchell breathed. Perfect profile shot. Wind steady. Take it when ready. The moment stretched like eternity. Marcus had entered what snipers call the zone, that perfect state where time seems to slow down and every detail becomes crystal clear. He could feel his own heartbeat, count the seconds between beats, and fire during the perfect stillness between pulses. The ghost stood motionless on the balcony, completely unaware that death was watching him from nearly a mile away. He held a radio handset in his left hand, apparently listening to a report from someone in the field. His right hand rested casually on the balcony railing, a gesture that spoke of complete confidence in his security arrangements. Marcus had memorized every detail of his target's position. The man stood 3 feet from the balcony's eastern edge, 2 feet from a concrete pillar that supported the roof overhang. If the shot was off by even 6 inches in any direction, it would miss completely or strike the concrete structure. "Wind check," Marcus whispered, barely audible. Colonel Mitchell studied the distant compound through his spotting scope, looking for visual indicators of wind patterns. A small flag hung limp from a pole in the compound's courtyard. Dust patterns on the ground showed minimal air movement at the target location. "Wind appears calm at the target," the colonel reported, "but I'm seeing some gusts at middle distance. Watch for wind drift." This was one of the most challenging aspects of extreme long-distance shooting. Wind conditions could vary dramatically between the shooter's position and the target. A bullet traveling 1,020 meters might encounter completely different air currents at various points along its path. Marcus made a final microscopic adjustment to his aim point, compensating for what he estimated the wind drift would be. At this distance, he was aiming roughly 8 feet to the left and 32 feet above where the ghost actually stood, trusting physics and mathematics to bring the bullet to its intended target. The ghost lowered the radio and turned to speak to someone off the balcony, probably giving orders to subordinates below. His profile was now perfectly presented to Marcus's position. The shot angle was ideal. Marcus began his final breathing sequence. Deep inhale, slow exhale to half capacity hold. His heart rate had slowed to about 50 beats per minute through practiced relaxation techniques. He found the pause between heartbeats and began applying pressure to the trigger. The Barrett M82A1's trigger had been professionally adjusted to break at exactly 3 pounds of pressure. Marcus applied the force gradually, straight back, keeping the rifle perfectly steady against his shoulder. Too much pressure too quickly would jerk the rifle off target. Too little pressure would cause him to lose the perfect moment. 2 pounds of pressure. Marcus could feel the trigger mechanism beginning to engage. His crosshairs were perfectly aligned on the target's center mass. Wind conditions were as good as they were likely to get. The ghost remained stationary, still talking to whoever was below the balcony. 2.5 pounds. The trigger was approaching its breaking point. Marcus's breathing had stopped completely in the natural pause his body had found. His heart was between beats. Everything was perfectly aligned. Colonel Mitchell held his breath as well, knowing that even the slightest vibration could affect the shot at this distance. Through his spotting scope, he kept his crosshairs fixed on the ghost, ready to call out any last-second movement that might require Marcus to abort the shot. 3 pounds of pressure. The rifle fired with a thunderous roar that echoed off the rocky terrain around their position. The massive .50 caliber bullet left the barrel at 2,800 feet per second, beginning its long arc toward the distant target. The rifle's recoil drove back against Marcus's shoulder with tremendous force, but years of training had taught him to manage it without moving off target. Through his scope, Marcus tried to track the bullet's path, but at that distance and speed it was impossible to see. The laws of physics were now in control. The bullet would take approximately 1.7 seconds to cover the distance to the target, during which time anything could happen. "Shot fired," Colonel Mitchell called quietly into his radio, alerting their extraction team that the mission was underway. The ghost continued talking, completely unaware that a bullet was racing toward him at nearly 3 times the speed of sound. He gestured with his free hand, apparently emphasizing some point to his subordinates. His body language suggested he was confident about whatever operation they were planning. Marcus kept his eye pressed to the scope, watching for the impact. At this distance, he would see the bullet strike before hearing the sound, which would take over 4 seconds to travel back to his position. Every sniper learned to read bullet impacts. The small puff of dust when a round hit dirt, the spark when it struck metal, the unmistakable way a target reacted when hit. 1 second passed. The bullet was roughly halfway to its target, traveling through air that was heating up as the morning progressed. Marcus found himself holding his breath, something he had never done on any previous shot. Usually the outcome was obvious within moments. This shot was different. This shot was impossible. The ghost stepped backward slightly, moving closer to the concrete pillar. Marcus felt his heart skip as he realized the man was moving directly into the bullet's calculated path. If his mathematics were correct, the ghost was walking directly into the line of fire. Movement, Colonel Mitchell whispered tensely. Target moving back toward the pillar. Marcus couldn't respond. His eye was locked on the scope, waiting for an impact that might never come. At 1,420 meters, even perfect marksmanship could be defeated by 1,000 different variables. A small bird flying through the bullet's path, an unexpected gust of wind, a slight miscalculation in any of the dozens of factors that affected long-distance shooting. 5 seconds. The bullet should be approaching the target area now, though at this distance Marcus couldn't see the compound clearly enough to track its final approach. Everything depended on the calculations he had made in those crucial moments before firing. The ghost raised his radio again, apparently responding to another transmission. His movement put him in a slightly different position than when Marcus had fired. Whether that would help or hurt the shot's accuracy was impossible to predict. 1.7 seconds after the shot, Marcus saw the impact through his scope. The ghost simply collapsed. One moment he was standing upright, radio in hand, apparently in complete control of his surroundings. The next moment he was falling backward, the radio spinning away from his grasp as his body crumpled to the concrete floor of the balcony. Hit, Colonel Mitchell confirmed quietly, his voice filled with professional satisfaction and underlying amazement.
Clean hit, center mass.
Target is down. Marcus continued watching through his scope, hardly believing what he had just witnessed. At 1,420 meters, with wind conditions that were far from ideal, his bullet had found its mark with devastating precision. The ghost lay motionless on the balcony floor, and there was no question that the shot had been fatal. The compound below erupted into chaos. Security personnel poured out of buildings, some running toward the balcony where their leader had fallen, others scanning the surrounding hills for signs of where the shot had come from. Marcus could see them pointing in various directions, clearly confused about the source of the attack. Sound should reach them in about 2 more seconds, Marcus said, already beginning to pack up his equipment. The successful shot had filled him with professional pride, but survival instincts took over immediately. They needed to be gone before the enemy could organize a response. Colonel Mitchell was speaking rapidly into his radio. Overwatch to Alpha Base, target eliminated. Repeat, the ghost is down. Requesting immediate extraction to Point Charlie. The sound of the gunshot finally reached the compound, a thunderous crack that echoed off the mountainsides. Marcus watched through his scope as the enemy fighters immediately began looking in the correct direction. It would take them time to pinpoint the exact location, but not much time. Sir, we need to move, Marcus said, slinging his rifle across his back and gathering the rest of his gear. The Barrett M82A1 weighed 30 pounds unloaded, plus ammunition and supporting equipment. Moving quickly over rough terrain while carrying a sniper's full kit was exhausting work, but their lives depended on speed now. Colonel Mitchell folded his spotting scope and grabbed his own pack. Extraction team reports they're in position at Point Charlie. ETA to our location is 6 minutes if we move fast. They began their descent down the backside of the ridge, moving as quickly as safety would allow over the loose rock and steep terrain. Marcus could hear shouting from the compound behind them, and the sound of vehicle engines starting up. The Ghost security team was mobilizing, but they would have to cover a lot of ground to reach the sniper's position. How did you know? Colonel Mitchell asked as they climbed down a particularly steep section of the hillside. The wind, the distance, all those variables. How did you know the shot would work? Marcus paused for a moment, considering the question. Honestly, sir, I didn't know. At that distance, with those conditions, it was maybe a 30% shot at best. But sometimes you have to trust your training and take the chance. They could hear helicopters in the distance now, though it was unclear whether they belonged to coalition forces or the enemy. Marcus hoped their extraction team was already airborne and heading their way. The longer they stayed in the area, the more likely it was that the Ghost's people would find them. Radio chatter suggests the compound is in complete disarray, Colonel Mitchell reported, listening to intelligence updates through his earpiece. Apparently, the Ghost was the only one who knew the details of tomorrow's planned ambush. Without him, they may not be able to coordinate the attack. This news filled Marcus with satisfaction that went beyond professional pride. Convoy Delta would make it through safely now. The medical supplies would reach the hospital. Dozens of soldiers and civilians would live because of a single, impossible shot fired from nearly a mile away. They reached a relatively flat section of the hillside where movement was easier. Behind them, Marcus could see vehicles racing along the roads that led toward their former position. The enemy was responding quickly, but they were searching in the wrong area. The acoustic properties of the mountain terrain had apparently confused them about the exact source of the shot. Movement to the east, Colonel Mitchell observed, pointing toward a dust cloud rising from a road that ran parallel to their escape route. Looks like they're trying to cut us off from the extraction point. Marcus studied the terrain ahead of them. Point Charlie was still about 2 kilometers away, across ground that offered little cover from observation. If enemy forces reached the area first, the extraction would become much more complicated. "Sir, request permission to set up a defensive position," Marcus said. "If they get between us and the extraction point, we're going to need to fight our way out." "Negative," Colonel Mitchell replied firmly. "Our orders are to extract immediately after the shot. Air support is available if we need it, but the priority is getting you and your equipment out safely." They continued moving toward Point Charlie, using whatever cover the terrain provided. Marcus found himself thinking about the shot he had just made. In 12 years as a military sniper, he had never attempted anything nearly so difficult. The combination of distance, wind, and environmental factors had made it a shot that most experts would have considered impossible. Yet somehow everything had aligned perfectly. The wind had remained steady during the bullet's flight. The Ghost had moved into the exact position where the bullet was aimed. All of Marcus's calculations had been correct, despite the complexity of the mathematics involved. "Helicopter approaching from the south," Colonel Mitchell announced, raising his binoculars to identify the aircraft. "That should be our ride." Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him. The extraction helicopter would be heavily armed and capable of defending itself against ground fire. Once they were airborne, the enemy's response would be too late to matter. The sound of the approaching helicopter grew louder, and Marcus could make out the distinctive shape of a Black Hawk coming in low over the hills. The pilot was flying an evasive pattern, clearly aware that enemy forces were active in the area. "Alpha 7 to Overwatch," came the voice over the radio. "We have you in sight. Be advised, we're taking some small arms fire from the compound area, but nothing that threatens the extraction. ETA to your position is 90 seconds. The Black Hawk helicopter touched down in a whirlwind of dust and rotor wash, its engines screaming at full power. Marcus and Colonel Mitchell ran toward the aircraft in a crouch, their equipment bouncing against their backs as they covered the final 50 meters to safety. "Go, go, go," shouted the crew chief, grabbing Marcus's rifle and helping him climb into the helicopter's cabin. Colonel Mitchell followed immediately behind, and within seconds they were airborne again, climbing rapidly away from the landing zone. Through the helicopter's window, Marcus could see enemy vehicles converging on their former position. They had missed the extraction by less than 3 minutes. The timing had been perfect, but it had also been uncomfortably close. "Outstanding work down there," the crew chief said over the intercom, his voice barely audible above the engine noise. "Command is calling it the longest confirmed kill in theater history. Maybe longer than that. They're still checking the records." Marcus settled back in his seat, finally allowing himself to relax. The Barrett M82A1 lay secured beside him, the weapon that had just made military history. But more importantly, it was the weapon that had saved Convoy Delta and countless other potential victims of the Ghost's planned attacks. "Sir, any word on the compound?" Marcus asked Colonel Mitchell over the intercom. "Complete chaos," the colonel replied, consulting his tactical display. "Intelligence is monitoring their communications. Without the Ghost's coordination, the various cells don't seem to know what to do. Some are arguing about who should take command. Others are talking about abandoning their positions entirely. This was exactly what intelligence analysts had predicted might happen. The Ghost had been more than just a military leader. He had been the organizing force that held together a loose coalition of different groups. Without his leadership and knowledge of operational details, the entire network was falling apart. The helicopter banked sharply to the left, following a flight path designed to avoid known anti-aircraft positions. Through his window, Marcus could see the compound where the Ghost had fallen, now swarming with activity as his followers tried to understand what had happened. Pilot reports were 20 minutes out from base, the crew chief announced. Medical and intelligence teams are standing by for debriefing. Marcus nodded, though he wasn't looking forward to the extensive questioning that would follow. Every long-distance shot was analyzed in detail, but a record-breaking kill would be studied for months. Ballistics experts would want to examine every aspect of the shot, from the environmental conditions to the specific ammunition used. The Black Hawk flew over a convoy of military vehicles heading toward the hospital in the valley. Marcus realized with satisfaction that this was probably Convoy Delta, now able to complete their mission safely because the Ghost was no longer alive to coordinate an ambush. The medical supplies they carried would save lives, and the soldiers escorting them would make it home to their families. "Rodriguez," Colonel Mitchell said, leaning over to speak privately. "What you accomplished back there. I've been in the military for 23 years and I've never seen anything like it. That shot will be talked about for decades." Marcus appreciated the recognition, but he found himself thinking about something else entirely. "Sir, what happens now? I mean, with the Ghost gone, what's the strategic situation in this area?" "Intelligence believes his network will collapse within a week," Colonel Mitchell replied. "They're already seeing infighting between different factions. Without his coordination and his knowledge of supply routes, weapons caches, and operational plans, they simply can't maintain their previous level of activity." This was perhaps the most satisfying aspect of the entire mission. The Ghost hadn't just been eliminated. His entire operation was disintegrating as a direct result. One precisely placed bullet had potentially saved hundreds of lives and disrupted enemy activities. Across the entire region, the helicopter began its descent toward the forward, operating base where Marcus and his unit were stationed. He could see the familiar buildings and defensive positions growing larger through the window. In a few minutes, he would be back in the relative safety of the base, surrounded by fellow soldiers who would want to hear every detail of the impossible shot. "Base ops to Alpha 7, came a voice over the radio. "Be advised that higher command wants a full tactical debrief as soon as you land. We also have media representatives requesting interviews about the long-distance engagement." Marcus groaned quietly. He had never enjoyed dealing with reporters, especially when they wanted to sensationalize military operations. The last thing he needed was to become some kind of celebrity sniper whose face appeared on news broadcasts. "Don't worry about the media," Colonel Mitchell said, apparently reading his thoughts. "We'll handle that through official channels. Your identity will remain classified for security reasons." The helicopter's landing gear touched down on the base's helipad with a slight bump. Ground crews immediately moved in to secure the aircraft and help unload equipment. Marcus gathered his gear and prepared for what he knew would be a very long day of debriefings, reports, and analysis. As he climbed down from the helicopter, Marcus was surprised to see General Patricia Williams waiting on the tarmac. The base commander rarely met returning aircraft personally, especially not for routine sniper missions. "Sergeant Rodriguez," General Williams said, extending her hand as Marcus approached. "I wanted to personally congratulate you on an extraordinary achievement. What you accomplished today will have strategic implications far beyond this single operation." Marcus shook the general's hand, still somewhat overwhelmed by the attention his shot was receiving. "Thank you, ma'am. Just doing my job." "Sergeant, that shot was far beyond anyone's job description," General Williams replied with a slight smile. "Intelligence estimates that the Ghost's elimination will reduce enemy activity in this sector by at least 60% over the next month. That translates to lives saved and missions accomplished." As they walked toward the base's command center, Marcus reflected on the morning's events. When he had woken up before dawn, he had expected another routine day of observation and intelligence gathering. Instead, he had made what would likely be remembered as one of the most remarkable shots in military history. But more than personal achievement, He felt satisfied knowing that Convoy Delta was safe, that medical supplies had reached their destination, and that the Ghost would never again coordinate attacks against coalition forces or innocent civilians. Sometimes one perfectly placed shot could change everything. 3 hours after the shot, Marcus sat in the base's intelligence center surrounded by maps, ballistics charts, and computer screens displaying atmospheric data from the morning's mission. Major Sarah Chen, the base's senior intelligence analyst, had been questioning him for over an hour about every detail of the engagement. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Major Chen said, looking up from her notes. "You compensated for a 32-foot bullet drop, an estimated 8-foot wind drift, and Coriolis effect over a distance of 1,120 meters, all while accounting for temperature and humidity variations between your position and the target." "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied, feeling somewhat embarrassed by the technical complexity being attributed to his shot. "It sounds more complicated when you break it down like that. In the moment, it was just applying the training." Major Chen shook her head in amazement. "Sergeant, most snipers would consider a 1,000-meter shot extremely challenging. You exceeded that by over 400 meters in field conditions, with a target who was moving intermittently. The mathematics alone are impressive, but executing them under pressure is extraordinary." A knock at the door interrupted the debriefing session. Lieutenant Colonel David Hayes, the base's operations officer, entered with a folder marked classified in red letters. "Sorry to interrupt," Colonel Hayes said, "but we're getting some interesting intelligence reports from the compound area. Sergeant Rodriguez, your shot appears to have had consequences beyond just eliminating the Ghost." He opened the folder and spread several photographs across the table. The images showed the compound from various angles, apparently taken by reconnaissance drones in the hours following the engagement. "These photos show complete abandonment of the facility," Colonel Hayes continued. "Intelligence estimates that over 200 enemy personnel have fled the area since this morning. They're calling it the fastest collapse of an insurgent network we've seen in this conflict." Marcus studied the photographs with interest. The compound that had been bustling with activity just hours earlier now appeared completely deserted. Vehicles were gone, equipment had been hastily abandoned, and there were clear signs that the evacuation had been conducted in panic rather than as an organized withdrawal. "What about the Ghost himself?" Marcus asked. "Was intelligence able to confirm his identity?" Major Chen pulled up a file on her computer screen. Positive identification was made through satellite imagery and intercepted communications. His real name was Colonel Hassan al-Mansouri, former military intelligence officer. He had been organizing insurgent activities in this region for over 18 months. The photograph on the screen showed a man in his early 50s wearing a military uniform, taken several years earlier. Marcus recognized the face he had seen through his scope that morning, though the earlier photo showed someone who looked younger and less weathered by conflict. His network was responsible for at least 14 attacks on coalition convoys. Major Chen continued reading from the file. "Intelligence estimates his operations resulted in 37 military casualties and unknown civilian losses. Your shot eliminated someone who had become one of the most effective enemy commanders in the theater." This information added weight to what Marcus had accomplished, but it also made him think about the human cost of conflict. Colonel al-Mansouri had once served his country as a legitimate military officer. Something had changed him into the enemy leader known as the Ghost, and now his story had ended on a balcony 1,420 meters from a sniper's rifle. "Sergeant," Colonel Hayes said, "I need to inform you that this engagement is being reviewed at the highest levels of command. The Secretary of Defense has been personally briefed on your shot. There's talk of recommending you for significant recognition." Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Sir, I'm honored by the consideration, but this was a team effort. Colonel Mitchell provided spotting support. Intelligence identified the target and opportunity, and our extraction team got us out safely. I just pulled the trigger." "Don't minimize what you accomplished," Major Chen said firmly. "Yes, it was a team effort, but the skill required to make that shot under those conditions is something very few people in the world possess. The ballistics computer estimates the probability of success at less than 30%, even for an expert marksman." A communications specialist knocked and entered the room, carrying a secure tablet with an encrypted message. "Sir, priority communication from Central Command for Sergeant Rodriguez." Colonel Hayes took the tablet and read the message silently, his eyebrows rising slightly as he processed the information. Sergeant, it appears your shot has attracted attention from military historians as well as operational commanders. They're requesting detailed documentation of the engagement for inclusion in the Army's official record of exceptional marksmanship. Marcus felt a mixture of pride and overwhelm at the growing attention. He had always preferred to work quietly, completing missions without fanfare. The idea of his shot being studied and documented felt strange, almost surreal. There's more, Colonel Hayes continued. Intelligence reports that enemy communications intercepted after the engagement included multiple references to supernatural or divine intervention. Apparently, the idea that someone could make such a shot from such a distance is being interpreted as impossible by human means. Major Chen pulled up another screen showing translated transcripts of enemy radio communications. Listen to this, she said, reading from the intercepts. Quote, "The ghost was taken by an invisible hand from the sky. No human weapon can reach so far with such accuracy. We are fighting against more than soldiers." End quote. This unexpected development added another dimension to the mission's success. Not only had the ghost been eliminated and his network disrupted, but the manner of his death was apparently creating psychological effects among enemy forces. The idea that coalition snipers could strike accurately from seemingly impossible distances might deter future operations. Sir, has there been any confirmation about Convoy Delta's status? Marcus asked, returning to his primary concern about the mission. Convoy Delta completed their mission successfully, Colonel Hayes replied with satisfaction. Medical supplies were delivered to the hospital without incident. The route they traveled was the same one the ghost had been planning to ambush tomorrow. Your shot literally saved lives. Marcus felt a deep sense of accomplishment hearing this confirmation. Beyond the technical achievement and military recognition, knowing that his marksmanship had directly protected fellow soldiers and ensured medical care reached civilians made everything worthwhile. Major Chen closed her files and gathered her notes. Sergeant, I think we have enough for the preliminary report. The detailed ballistics analysis will take several more days, but the essential facts are clear. You made an extraordinary shot under challenging conditions and achieved a strategically significant result. As the debriefing session concluded, Marcus realized that his life as a soldier had fundamentally changed. Word of the 1,420-meter shot would spread throughout the military community and beyond. He would no longer be just another sniper in the unit. He would be the soldier who made the impossible shot. Colonel Hayes walked with Marcus toward the door. Sergeant, I want you to know that this engagement will likely influence sniper training and doctrine for years to come. Your shot proves that with proper equipment, training, and conditions, effective engagement ranges are greater than previously thought possible. Walking back to his quarters, Marcus reflected on the day's events. When he had joined the military 12 years earlier, he had never imagined he would one day make a shot that would be remembered in military history. The Barrett M82A1 that had made it possible was now secured in the armory, but it would forever be associated with one of the longest confirmed kills in combat. That evening, as Marcus cleaned his personal weapons and prepared his equipment for the next day's potential missions, he thought about Colonel Al-Mansouri. The man had been an enemy, responsible for numerous attacks and casualties, but he had also been a human being with his own story and motivations. War created these situations where skilled professionals on opposite sides tried to eliminate each other from incredible distances. The ghost was gone, his network was collapsing, and Convoy Delta had completed their mission safely. From any military perspective, the day had been an overwhelming success. But as Marcus settled in for the night, he found himself hoping that the strategic impact of the shot might contribute to bringing the broader conflict to a conclusion sooner rather than later. 6 months later, Marcus stood before a gathering of military personnel in the Pentagon's main auditorium. The ceremony had been planned for weeks, but he still felt uncomfortable being the center of attention. General Patricia Williams, now promoted to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, was presenting him with the Distinguished Service Cross for his actions that day in the mountains. Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez, General Williams announced to the assembled crowd, demonstrated extraordinary heroism and exceptional marksmanship under combat conditions. His precisely executed long-distance engagement eliminated a high-value target and directly saved the lives of American service members and coalition allies. The medal felt heavy in Marcus's hands as he accepted it. Behind him, a large screen displayed a tactical map showing the shot's trajectory and the strategic impact of the Ghost's elimination. 6 months of analysis had confirmed that the single shot had indeed collapsed an entire insurgent network. Colonel Mitchell sat in the front row, having received his own commendation for the mission's planning and execution. He caught Marcus's eye and nodded with quiet satisfaction. Their partnership that morning had been perfect, each man contributing essential skills to accomplish what many had considered impossible. The engagement represents a milestone in precision marksmanship, General Williams continued. At 420 meters, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's shot established a new standard for long-distance accuracy in combat conditions. More importantly, it demonstrated how individual excellence can achieve strategic objectives. After the ceremony, Marcus found himself surrounded by reporters, military historians, and fellow soldiers who wanted to hear firsthand about the famous shot. He answered questions politely but tried to keep the focus on the team effort rather than individual achievement. Sergeant Rodriguez asked a reporter from Military Times, "Do you believe your shot represents the maximum effective range for sniper operations? Or could similar engagements be made at even greater distances?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "I think that shot was made possible by a combination of excellent equipment, favorable conditions, and honestly, some luck. Could someone make a longer shot? Maybe, with the right circumstances. But I wouldn't recommend planning operations around shots at that distance." A young lieutenant approached during a break in the interviews. "Sergeant, I'm scheduled to attend sniper school next month. Do you have any advice for someone just starting advanced marksmanship training?" "Focus on the fundamentals," Marcus replied. "Breathing, position, trigger control, reading environmental conditions. Master those basics and everything else builds from there. And remember, the goal isn't to make spectacular shots. The goal is to complete the mission and bring everyone home safely." Later that evening, Marcus called his wife Maria from his hotel room in Washington. She had watched the ceremony on a live stream from their home in North Carolina, where she was caring for their 2 young children. "I'm so proud of you," Maria said. Her voice warmed despite the phone connection. "The kids watched, too. Emily wants to know if you're famous now." Marcus laughed. "Tell Emily that Daddy just did his job really well one day. The important thing is that some good people are safe because of what our team accomplished." "Will this change anything for us?" Maria asked. "I mean, with all the attention and recognition?" "I don't think so," Marcus replied honestly. "I'm still assigned to the same unit, still doing the same job. The only difference is that now people know about one particular shot, instead of just the guys in my squad." Over the following months, Marcus found that his assessment was largely correct. While the 420-meter shot had made him well known within military circles, his day-to-day responsibilities remained essentially unchanged. He continued training with his unit, deployed on standard missions, and worked to improve his skills and those of junior soldiers. The Barrett M82A1 rifle that had made the shot possible was eventually retired to the Army Museum, where it was displayed alongside a detailed account of the engagement. Marcus visited the exhibit once during a training assignment in the area, feeling strange to see his weapon and his story preserved as historical artifacts. More satisfying than the recognition were the long-term results of the mission. Intelligence reports confirmed that the Ghost's network had never reorganized after his elimination. The region where his compound had been located became significantly more stable, allowing humanitarian aid to reach civilian populations that had been cut off during the insurgency. 2 years after the shot, Marcus received a letter from Dr. Sarah Hassan, a physician at the hospital that had received the medical supplies from Convoy Delta. She wrote that the antibiotics and surgical equipment delivered that day had been crucial in treating victims of a disease outbreak that occurred shortly afterward. Dozens of lives had been saved because the convoy completed its mission safely. Marcus kept that letter in his desk drawer, alongside his other important documents. While the Distinguished Service Cross and the recognition were meaningful, knowing that his marksmanship had contributed to saving civilian lives meant more to him than any military decoration. As his career continued, Marcus was eventually assigned to train other snipers, sharing the techniques and mental approach that had made the impossible shot possible. He always emphasized to his students that exceptional marksmanship was about more than just technical skill. It required patience, judgment, and the ability to perform under extreme pressure. Remember, he would tell each new class of sniper students, "You're not training to make spectacular shots for the history books. You're training to protect your fellow soldiers and complete missions that save lives. Everything else is just mathematics and practice." The shot from 1,420 meters away had lasted less than 2 seconds from trigger pull to impact. But its consequences, the lives saved, the enemy network disrupted, and the strategic objectives achieved, continued for years afterward. In the end, Marcus reflected, that was what truly mattered. Not the distance of the shot, but the positive difference it made in the world.